Okay, so before I head off on this crazy thing, I feel like it's only fair to explain how we got here and what I'm about to do, just in case I never come back. So I guess you could say that things got worse. I mean, of course they got worse, right? Droughts, wars, famines, refugees, police states, all of it. It all got worse. Everybody knew it was going to, and it did. So when they rolled out the first experience machines, it just seemed like a great idea. So I signed up. This startup had figured out that they could crazily profit off of carbon tax credits or whatever if they could help a whole bunch of people to reduce their footprint. And the plan was really simple. You just hand over your retirement account, 401k, whatever it is, they manage it for you, and you just get into this tank and they hook your brain up to this AI world sim, and that's your life. Right? Sounds fantastic. A lot of people said it was like an open roam video game, but for me, it was like a movie. I'd never really had anything going on in my life up to that point, so I figured, what the heck? For what it was, the sim was okay, I guess. I mean, not much to write home about. The news was interesting. We figured out pretty quickly that for every bad thing that happened on the outside, its mirror image would be spat out by the AI on the inside. So wars became peace treaties. Every tree that burned down was changed into a tree that was planted. Anyway, we had all basically gotten used to everyday life inside this world sim when something really strange happened. The date was November 16th, 2027, and the news reported that a celebrity that nobody had ever heard of, somebody named Diego Ricardo, whom the AI described as the world's youngest person, had survived an attempt on their life. And I almost let it go until I suddenly remembered that's the opening scene of the 2006 movie Children of Men. And suddenly I realized that what must have happened was this world sim, who didn't know the difference between reality and fiction, must have suctioned up a Pirates Bay full of torrented movies and incorporated them into its training data. But like I said, that was just a guess. I needed confirmation. Specifically, what I needed to find was a fiction film with at least one exact date given in the movie and an exact place associated with that, so I could check and see whether that event had been integrated into the simulation. And the best thing I could find for this purpose was from the 2018 film Hotel Artemis, which takes place on a single night in downtown Los Angeles on a date given the very first frame of the movie, the 21st of June, 2028. Now, this was probably going to be tricky because most of Hotel Artemis is either interiors inside this secret private hospital run by Jodie Foster, where some rich people are seeking refuge during water riots in LA, and the rest of it mostly takes place in alleyways, but they do mention Spring Street and Main Street. So I hopped onto Google Maps, and armed with this single shot of Jenny Slate walking away when they blow up the sign on the roof, suddenly I found it. 761 North Main Street, that's the building that's used as the exteriors. And in the wide shot, you can see the US Bank Tower in the background. So I figured, what the hell? Maybe I just get on the 10, drive around to the south, and I'll be able to see it. And I did. There it was. I had the proof that I needed. As far as I could tell, basically every fiction film ever, even the really obscure ones like Hotel Artemis, had been incorporated into this bot's AI world sim. And that's when I had the idea. What if I could use this glitch to travel back in time? In movies, time can go anywhere. And if this thing had ingested some movies, it probably also ingested some pretty exotic, fragmented temporal topology too. So I started looking for a movie with like a big temporal leap in it to see if it was possible to go back to the past. But again, the criteria were the same. It had to have a real given date in it, and it had to take place at a real physical place that you could go to. Otherwise, how would the sim integrate it into it with any predictability? And it turns out I actually didn't have to look all that far. Here in the 2002 adaptation of The Time Machine, we see our time traveler right outside the steps of the New York Public Library on May 24th, 2030. So I waited. And then I traveled to New York, gave myself plenty of time, sat watching for the characters to walk up. And when they did, I don't even really know how to say this, but I just stepped into the movie. I mean, I couldn't believe it. The whole reason I watched movies is because my entire life I had always wanted to be somewhere else, someone else. And suddenly it was happening. The only bad part of the whole thing was that I had to watch the 2002 version of The Time Machine all the way over again. But as soon as that was done, it deposited me back in 1899. It worked. Now, I should mention that I didn't just go to 1899 without a plan. I spent the 2 years between 2028 and 2030 mapping out as many space-time routes through this catastrophically fragmented fiction film overlay on the world sim as I could. I didn't want to get trapped, right? So I researched. For instance, in the 1979 movie Time After Time, H.G. Wells, the author of The Time Machine, actually builds a time machine in the basement of his London apartment. And if that's not ridiculous enough, this time machine is then stolen by Jack the Ripper on the night of November 5th, 1893, and he takes it to travel to November 5th, 1979 in San Francisco, USA, where H.G. Wells pursues him to try to stop him. Completely crazy, but it's got a findable place, it's got a specific date. The only drawback is that it's a one-way trip. No room for error on that one. For another example, in the 1982 movie Time Rider, a motorcycle racer named Lyle Swan is participating in this overland desert racing event south of Mexicali on November 4th, 1982, when he gets caught up in a time travel experiment some scientists are conducting, and they zap him all the way back to November 5th, 1877. If you're like me, you probably noticed that both of these time travel movies, one from 1979, one from 1982, both for some reason use November 5th as the date on which time travel takes place. And I just want to mention for the record that these movies were made 3 and 6 years before this movie.
Yes, of course, November 5th, 1955.
What? I don't get what happened.
That was the day I invented time travel.
I don't know what it is about November 5th, but that's not the point. Anyway, by the time I was done, I had mapped out dozens of routes and partial routes. I'd memorized stock tips and sporting upsets and survival info and contingency plans. I had taken care of everything. And then I suddenly realized I had no idea where I wanted to go. I mean, where do you go when you travel through time? I was inside a simulation, so there was no point in going to kill a dictator or something like that. I figured that most other people, if they were in this situation, they'd probably, go back and rekindle a lost love or relive a precious memory, something like that. But I didn't have any of that stuff. Movies were all I'd ever wanted. And for the most part, they were all I really had, too. And suddenly, with so many movies mapped out all in front of me, I just felt indifferent to all of them. I mean, if movies were all I was, then who was I? It made me think about that quote from Cary Grant and how his whole life, even he didn't really know who he was underneath that star persona. He certainly wasn't the man that people saw on screen. And that's when I got the thought. I had to find him. I had to find Cary Grant. Call me crazy, call me ridiculous. That was suddenly the plan. I was going to go back in history and I was going to sit down and have a chat with Cary Grant. And you know what? It turned out not to be all that hard to find particular places attached to particular dates in Cary Grant movies. For instance, I could track him to the UN building in New York, where on November 25th, 1958, he gets framed for the murder of a diplomat. That's in North by Northwest, and in that movie, he's on the run from basically everybody. And isn't that the problem? Right? In movies, people are doing things all the time. But I needed a moment in a Cary Grant movie where there was a long, uninterrupted stretch of him doing nothing at all. In the 1946 film Notorious, Cary Grant's character convinces Ingrid Bergman to become a spy and enter into this sham marriage with Claude Rains' character in order to expose a uranium smuggling operation. But when Claude Rains figures out that she's a plant, he traps her in the house and starts to gradually poison her to keep her quiet. Up to that point, she had been sneaking out on a regular basis to meet Cary Grant's character, right, her handler, to give him updates on the operation. But suddenly, he's sitting on a park bench and she's nowhere to be found. So for 5 days, he waits on that park bench for her to arrive. 5 days of Cary Grant sitting around doing nothing. And what's better, the start of Notorious is exactly anchored in space and time. It would be perfect. I put together the route almost immediately. Now this is going to be convoluted, but here we go. I enter, just like I said, May 24th, 2030 on the front steps of the New York Public Library. I walk into the time machine from 2002 and travel all the way back to January 1899. At this point, I have a gap of almost a year during which, I make money, I lay low, and I travel over to England. Now, the reason I'm going to England is because the 1933 Best Picture winning film Cavalcade opens right here, 1:45 on New Year's Eve, 1899. So I'll follow that film forward in time and then hop out here on Dover Beach just before the scene of the sinking of the Titanic and make my way back to the USA, where my next stop will be in the year 1912 in the movie Somewhere in Time. Specifically,
you are lying on your bed in the Grand Hotel, and it is 6 p.m. in the evening of June 27th, 1912.
Where Christopher Reeve, as the playwright Richard Collier, has magically projected himself into the past somehow to reunite with his lost love. When the spell is broken, he suddenly leaps back to the year 1980. Once I'm in the year 1980, I make my way to the USS Arizona Memorial in Pearl Harbor, where I can step right into the 1980 movie The Final Countdown, in which the USS Nimitz happens to sail through this temporal rift, which lands it right in the middle of the December 7th, 1941 attack. I escape from that, I stop in on the summer of 42 if I really want to, and then I get over to Philadelphia in October 1943, where I board the USS Eldridge, which is the subject of the 1984 film The Philadelphia Experiment, which is about a ship that gets somehow sent through a temporal rift, this time forward in time to the year 1984. After that, Okay, actually, you know what? This is getting too long. I'm sorry. Let me just cut to the chase here. I use this screenshot of a map of New York City from the 2014 Ethan Hawke movie Predestination to locate the wash and dry laundromat on the corner of 30th and 6th in March 1975, and I leap out at the exact point in the flashback montage on this shot of a baby, which earlier the movie has told us takes place at the City of Cleveland Orphanage in September 1945, and I'll have plenty of time to travel south to Miami to that district court and arrive there on April 24th, 1946, and hop into Notorious right as the movie is starting. And then an hour and 28 minutes later, I'll find Cary Grant in Rio, sitting on that park bench. With any luck, maybe we'll strike up a friendship on that park bench. Maybe we'll talk about stuff, about how he went from being Archibald Leach to Cary Grant. Maybe he'll learn something about who he really is. Maybe he'll help me figure out who I really am. I don't know. It's a crazy dream maybe, but it could be a lot worse. I mean, in fact, everywhere else in the real world, it definitely is a lot worse. So I guess I'm just recording this to say that if somehow I get lost, I just want anybody who finds this to know that it was doing something I really wanted to do.